Whether you're a first-time listener or a long-time fan, you're safe to think we're pretty AI forward here. But in all our talk about AI being the future, it can be easy to lose sight of the actual future, our kids. AI is bringing up all kinds of issues critical for both society at large and individual parents, like me. What kind of world are we creating? How will our kids find their place? And what does their education look like to get them ready? We're on with Edward Glassman, faculty and leading voice of the AI task force at Philadelphia's prestigious Springhill Chestnut Hill Academy, on what it looks like to raise the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, how to navigate AI in the education space, and what it means to be a parent and teacher in this age of transition. I'm Arturo, and this is AI Tool Report Live. I have the pleasure today being here with Edward Glassman, a friend from a long time. My regret doing this podcast is that I didn't learn how to say Dos Equis in Hebrew, because you are by far one of the most interesting humans I have ever met, dude. To this day, you're still the only person I've ever seen hit a bullseye from behind.
Yep. Legendary night.
Legendary.
We've had a lot of those.
You're the closest thing I ever had to a college roommate. You know that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm sorry I'm without a microphone. I hope the audio works fine for you.
Yeah, well, the AI fixes that.
There you go.
It works great. It's awesome. Great. So, all right. So in addition to catching up, because I'm really excited to kind of catch up on what you've been doing, and we just kind of went through the whole, like, how was our family doing, which is beautiful. Mm-hmm. I know that you have been at your school and at your position for a few years now. And last time we spoke, you told me about starting kind of an AI initiative within the school. So before we get too far along the AI, I think just tell us where you're at, what you're doing there, and kind of like what you're working on with your students and faculty.
Sure. So I work at a private school in Philadelphia called Springhill Chestnut Hill Academy. It's about 1,200 students. Pre-K to 12, actually younger than pre-K. You know, my 2-year-old is here in an early childhood program. And my role here is our director of two different kind of like unique programs. I run a Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership, which is sort of like an umbrella of entrepreneurship, design, technology classes. And then I also run our new media disciplines. So that's video production, audio production, animation, architecture, that sort of thing. So all the things that fall outside of your basic prep school food groups, all those sort of 21st century literacies that we all know students need to be exposed to, students are passionate about, kind of the tip of the spear for project-based learning and for sort of like an innovative approach to what school looks like. So everything we do at the school under those two umbrellas is hands-on, project-based. It's kind of like mastery, transcript-based. They're gaining skills and they're doing things that they're excited about. And we try to help them work on things that sit at the intersection of what are they passionate about, what are problems they want to solve in the world, and if they had the day off from school and they could work on anything productive, what would that look like? So we build experiences around that, culminating in 10th grade with a capstone where they launch their own businesses or nonprofits or apps or inventions. So it's a wild, amazing experience of hundreds and hundreds of kids that every day are blowing my mind. And part of the role and part of what I do with my team is we try to keep our finger on the pulse of, okay, well, like, what's next? How does this program and what we teach need to evolve and adapt to the changing nature of college and career? So, what was HTML and JavaScript 7 years ago became mobile app development. And now, of course, as every industry is, we're trying to reckon with what AI looks like, how it can come to life in our school in responsible ways. What is our philosophy around it? What are the tools that are best suited for our students, right? Because as you know, in your work, like, there are things that work really well in industry and in government, but are literally like illegal for minors to use, right? Like, we're not really allowed to have kids under 18 using GPT. You have to use these like special approved education-based AI products. And also, we're trying to figure out, okay, well, in a world where school has been very similar forever in terms of the types of assignments kids are given and how they're expected to prove their work, both in formative and summative assessments, AI blows all that up, right? Like I would say the two best product market fits for these AI tools are A, coding, right? Like a powerful coding assistant.
Yep.
And B, cheating on your history final, right? So that's why if you look at the data for GPT-4 and you see this huge drop off in terms of use during spring break and summer break, right? Like this is a really steadfast population of, who's using these tools are kids, right. 16, 17, 18. So we as a school, need to get out in front of that. We need to both figure out how to train faculty to build assignments that are AI resistant, if not AI proof, but also, and probably more importantly, help our students become equipped for a world where their careers are going to be so dramatically different because of these types of tools than the types of careers that you and I have, the types of careers that our parents have.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. And my background, how I feel about traditional education in general. So it's exciting to hear what you're doing, right? The idea that we're teaching kids to think critically and actually engage with things versus just memorize to a test and move on, or not memorize, as is the case from the data usage of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
When we look at kind of what you're doing with the school, like the innovation stuff, the media management, did that position exist before, or did you kind of were you put into that? Were they like, hey, we want to open a whole new course? When you started at SCH, did that exist, or was that kind of created when you came on board?
Yeah, when I was brought on board to consult for the this Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership idea, and then a consulting opportunity became a decades-long career. But this school has always been incredibly progressive in terms of technology and innovation. We've always had education technology experts. We're one of the few K-12 schools I've ever heard of that literally has a chief innovation officer, who Peter DiNonato, who I'm working with on this AI task force. But the Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership was a big swing. This idea that you could marry the kind of stodgy coat and tie traditional aspects of a prep school in Philadelphia. And there are a lot of prep schools in our region. It's an incredibly competitive marketplace with, progressive education, hands-on, project-based, one-to-one tech, coding, engineering. That at the time was bold. I think now every school, that's worth their medal is thinking about this stuff and trying to catch up. There are a lot of this landscape is littered with maker spaces that are gathering cobwebs, right? Mm-hmm. Because a school will make a major investment in let's buy some 3D printers, right? Or let's build a computer, studio or whatever.
Sure.
But they don't have the faculty and they don't have the programmatic time built in to actually take advantage of those resources. I'd say that's what we do really well. So we built the physical infrastructure to help our students do this stuff, but we also carved out a major portion of the curriculum where every single kid at our school, beginning in 5th grade, goes through this carefully designed course sequence where they're being exposed to all these tools and these technologies in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, right? And then in 9th and 10th grade, they begin to specialize. They can focus on engineering or business or product design. And then in 10th grade, they get to take all that and turn it into a project of their own volition. And then we have, a team of 10 faculty members that are all these wild, dynamic folks that you'd never expect to see at a school, right? Architects and engineers and music producers. And their full-time job is running these classes and guiding kids through this process. So you infuse AI into that, I would say we are as well positioned as any K to 12 school to figure this out. And the key to figuring it out is going to be being flexible and adaptable, right? Because I think these tools are in a certain place right now where, there's a lot of promise, but I think there are a lot of people who maybe 6 months ago were all wide-eyed, like, oh my God, this is going to transform the world of work and education forever. And now you're hearing those same people being like, oh, well, all right, so it's blockchain all over again, or it's NFTs all over again. And like all the hype is just to increase the stock valuation of these companies. And it's just another way that Google and Microsoft and whoever can say, all right, well, here's what's next. Right. But I don't think that. Like, I tend to push back on that. I think that right now the way that students are using these tools is mostly to make their academic work easier and to be kind of like lazier. But if we teach them, the right ways to use it, this will be like the internet was, the dawn of the internet. Right? You had faculty members at that time who were saying, well, how are kids going to maintain the ability to conduct effective research, to write effectively, to think independently, if every piece of knowledge in the history of human civilization is right at their fingertips with a search, right? And that's, I think, the same dynamic that we're going to start seeing with AI, except amplified.
Right. Yeah, and there's that fine line. There's a fine line between lazy and efficiency. That, like, we try to teach people. It's like, yeah, it's just doing things with less work. That's not unreasonable. The question is, like, kind of what are the outputs we're looking at? So you started consulting. This was like probably 12 years ago that you started at SCH, if I remember correctly?
Yeah.
Maybe longer? Yeah. Okay, so you started there. Consulting turned into a full-time gig, and then AI happens. That's a pretty compressed timeline for something that was already a new program. So,
well, AI happened in the last 18 months for us. I'd been here 10 years, but I would say I'm experiencing less whiplash with this than most of the teachers who work here, right? Because my role is to kind of be flexible and adaptable and be comfortable with the courses we teach and the technologies our students use changing pretty dramatically. And I've hired a lot of people that are good at that too. But imagine if you are like an incredibly talented English teacher, right? And you've had a 20-year career where you're helping. I mean, you've had amazing teachers in your life, right? Like, you know what it's like when someone's got that magic touch and they can teach a student how to think in incredible ways and communicate in incredible ways. And they do that through lecture and through project and through writing. And then all of a sudden overnight, you're like, okay, well, now the senior administration at my school is introducing a new AI tool. All right, take your pick. Magic School's a big one in our industry. There's a outfit out of Y Combinator called Flint that we used for the last year. Google Classroom, already has all these tools built in, like all the same things you see with Gemini are built in, to the Google Classroom framework. And if you're a teacher, at best, you're thinking, well, now I'm training my replacement, right? Like, administration wants me to build AI optimized assignments and in-classroom assignments by taking my curriculum and taking my lecture notes and taking my grading rubrics and uploading them to the cloud, and it spits out a chatbot that can tutor my kids when they're not in class with me.
Right. In my voice, in my intonation, my syntax, like the whole thing. Yeah, you create my own persona.
Exactly. So, I think we have a pretty good pathway for how to teach kids about these tools, right? We want to help them with technical understanding of how the tools work. We want to help them with critical interaction, right? Like, everything from the fact that these tools hallucinate all the time to where are they pulling the information from the biases that are inherent with how it's trained. We want them to think about ethical consideration and creative integration. Those are the 4 pillars for our work at our school. But I struggle with training the faculty, right? And this is going to be a huge change to how schools work, just like the internet was.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of opportunity lies. But what I see in the industry, is that you have a lot of these fresh-faced startups in the AI space that understand the technology but really don't understand teachers, right? And don't understand education. So they come in and they think they're selling, a product, and they don't really understand like the relational aspect of what is it like to put these tools in front of veteran teachers, or even, younger teachers who are just kind of getting their feet wet.
Right.
And how it's kind of like it could be seen as a crisis for certain types of folks.
Yeah, especially in your industry, I would imagine, because like when you look at a private school, it's kind of like the last bastion of good teachers in many ways. And by no means would I say that good teachers don't exist outside of the private school system, right? Like my mother-in-law is, public school teacher, was for a long time. But there's a massive drop off because of lack of funding, lack of support, the whole thing, where quality people leave very quickly. So when you have these like oases of talent in probably one of like arguably the most important industry, right? Teaching humans how to human. It's intense. So being that you are, if not the A face of this AI transformation for your faculty, what is that experience like? What do you hear most? What's the pushback? What's the fears? And like, how do you address it? Because that fear is pervasive beyond just teachers, right? That's like all over the place. People are mostly ascribing to the like shove your head in the sand and maybe AI doesn't happen, right? But it is. It's going to keep happening. It is a societal shift, to your point. It's also at the peak of a hype cycle. I agree with both, right? So how do you address that? How do you kind of navigate that discomfort from your teachers?
I don't know. I mean, it's a great question. I mean, luckily I'm not the only person at the school who's thinking about this. It's a broader team. And I think the way that you do any of these things effectively is grassroots, right? The mistake that I think we made early on with our Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership, which is now 10 years old and has a great firm place within the school and is widely respected and liked by both teachers and faculty, is that 10 years ago, it was a top-down thing. It was like the head of school, the head of the board of trustees made this broad announcement. Entrepreneurial leadership is going to be like this cornerstone of what we do as a school. And the reaction from a lot of folks was like, what does that even mean? And how is that going to come to life operationally at a school? And how is it going to change what we do and how we do it? At the best, our competitors in the Philadelphia market were like, oh, well, they're going to become a vocational technology school. If you want the classic literature, you come our way, right? We won that fight. Not now. All the schools are trying to catch up with us, I think, in a lot of ways. But AI is very similar, right? So the first thing we did was we opened up a lot of these tools. We paid, monthly license fees, and we said to faculty, hey, like, here are the keys. Have at it. Explore what's possible and what isn't. And then for a professional development day in February, we basically had a big, massive show and tell, right? So we had 25 faculty members from all different disciplines across all different age levels come up and like give a 3-minute demo of what they were doing with their classes and to leverage AI. Some of it was really, really cool. And some of it was like, hey, this tool can't do physics yet, right? Like it just makes mistakes. But like you need to be aware of that to even begin to have the conversation. Right. But then at the end of that show and tell, we're the Blue Devils, like Duke University basically. That's our mascot. So I had this thing called the Blue Devils Advocates Club, right? So the idea was all the faculty members who are feeling a certain way about this, we're going to gather in a space, and you're going to have like a group therapy session, right? And I'm looking at the notes from it on my secondary monitor, and like the points they were making are really valid, right? Like one of the quotes was, I think the message that kids should be looking at screens more and talking to kids less is problematic. Seems to run counter to what we know about kids and mental health. I don't want a kid asking AI about mental health, right? Another one was following this morning's conversation where students share about the relationships that make them feel special. And then some people are using a device that saves time from talking with their peers. We saw the correlation between increased use of social media and computers and sense of belonging, or a lack of belonging. Why would we increase the exposure for the kids? So I think you're going to hear about this, right? You're going to hear about, okay, so we had this massive learning experience in real time with social media companies. And the wide, interpretation of that journey for teens is that, I think at this point in the broader media landscape, it's like, it's equivalent to smoking, right? If you're a teen girl and you're on Instagram, you're killing yourself, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you've got, government entities that are pushing back and blah, blah, blah. That conversation trickles into schools, right? I would say the number one thing that our senior administration is scared about at our school is like kids on social media and the dangers there within. And it's legit. Like, I'm not rolling my eyes at that. We've had some terrible stuff happen at our school rooted in the dangers and toxicity of social media. And I think you're going to hear, okay, now we're entering this world where it's like social media, but amplified. I think just as many kids are going to be using these tools to create, buddies that they can have artificial conversations with, as are going to be using it to write a history paper. And what does that world look like? And how do we reckon with the isolation and the mental health impact potentially on kids? It's going to be hard to say.
Right. And you're hard pressed to.
Yeah. When I first started here, my line on Facebook and Instagram was like, this is the great level setting of American industry. It's a meritocracy. If you have a great product or a great story to tell, now you have this engine, you can get it out there. You don't have to do a giant media buy cycle. And this, you've built a career around this stuff, right? So what are we going to be saying in 10 years when we look back at this pivotal moment? Who's going to make that bold call to say, you know what, we're not going to have AI at our school at all. And we think it's a mental health play. And is that person going to be right? Or are they going to have their head buried in the sand and they're going to hamstring their kids because their students aren't going to be exposed to these tools, and when they get into college, they're going to be way behind.
Yeah. No, you think of the evolution of recess, right? Like you think of okay, well, we're going to do the 2-hour break a day and just go touch grass outside. Right, this is the sun. Do you remember the sun? Yeah. It is real. Teresa and I talk about it fairly often that the social media bit in the next 20 years is going to be looked back on, to your point, same example, smoking. It's going to be how did we ever allow this amount of unsupervised time? Just go nuts, have fun. That's fine. I get it, right? We're parents. We are tired regularly. Right. And now, as it's like a baseline. And then on top of that now, you think of how tired you are as a parent, but now you have a teenager that is also exhausting you and is bullying you probably, right? Because they're just not good people. I'm sure they're very nice in doses.
I guess
you don't have to. You don't have to comment. I know you work around them, and parents will probably hear this. Yeah. But I'm using myself as a teenager as a baseline, and I don't want myself as a teenager, and I'm going to get 3 of myself. I know. Right.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So we look at this, and I think the extrapolation becomes, how do we navigate responsibly, and how do we? I don't think it's creating lessons, and I don't think, from what I've learned in the last few years, it's about creating lessons that adhere to AI, but just this kind of AI forward of it is a part of us, whether we like it or not. We are, in the purest definition of the word, cybernetic organisms at this, right? We are connected to our technology in a very real way. Sure. And that is the story of human civilization. It's the transfer, storage, and processing of information. From cave paintings to roads to the internet, it's all how we've been able to interact much more quickly. And if that number starts to shrink faster and faster, we need to start teaching kids how to navigate that, where I think the problem becomes us. We need to figure this out fairly quickly. And the teachers are going to struggle because they've poured in their heart and soul and PhDs and all this stuff into something that now I can look up in 7 seconds and have, even 80% chance of it being correct, right? Because yes, it's hallucinate. The thing hallucinates and it's funny, but it also doesn't hallucinate that often. And it also depends on what it hallucinates on, right? It depends on the data set, what we're asking it, what we're getting from. Like, will it hallucinate architecturally? Probably most of the time. Will it do a poor job at math? Probably most of the time. Yeah. But language, history, right? For now, right?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would like push back on a little bit is the idea that teachers, good teachers, are still focused on like knowledge, retention, and recall, right? I think most good schools have reached a point where they're sniffing out teachers who are just like memorize these facts and spit it on a test. And instead they're hiring folks who understand that your job as an educator is to help students solve problems, navigate through complexity, express themselves in clear and compelling ways, work effectively in teams, all the stuff that like you'd want for your kids. What's so interesting is that we had this the rise of the internet that forced education to make this adjustment away from memorizing facts and spinning it out on a test. And now the question becomes, what will this next major technological revolution force schools to do?
Right.
How will it force us to change and evolve? And the hardest part about answering that is that the technology is changing and evolving so quickly.
Right.
A lot of the conversations I have with my colleagues here, it eventually comes back to, how do I stop these kids from cheating? And I get it. Like, that makes sense to me. I understand why they're coming from that place, because it's a foundational threat to the way that we do our work. But I hope that eventually the conversation can evolve beyond that, right? And it's not just about preventing kids from using these tools in ways we don't want them to, but it's about equipping them to use them in ways we do want them to, right? That's what it comes down to.
Right. So with that, how have you seen the student response to the stuff you're doing with AI? Like, what are some of the things that they've said and experienced, knowing that teachers are kind of like, this is very scary and overwhelming?
Oh man, it's been so fascinating. So, our students run the gamut of interests and passions and what they do, right? We got kids here who are like C students, and they're really interested in being in theater and performing arts, right? We have kids here who are incredible scholars. We have kids here who are incredible athletes. The incredible scholars, when you, like for a class assignment, right? I teach a 8th grade entrepreneurship class, for example, right? And I build I built a chat bot, on the back of this AI tool that serves as their prospective customer, and the students have to log on to this moderated chat and have a real conversation about the product or service they're coming up with and talk about the benefits and the competition and, the cost and the price. And those kids that are academics, it's like, keep this away from me. Like, even looking at this tool is cheating, right? So that's one end of the spectrum. And another end of the spectrum, because we use this tool this year called Flint that I mentioned earlier, and as being an admin, I have dashboard access. So I can see what every single person is doing on this thing, students and teachers. So the other end of the spectrum is kids who literally, they're just typing in their homework questions, right? And having this tool that we as an institution have given to them, having this tool spit out the answers. So I had a moment, and this happens to me fairly often because I'm kind of the let's go, we'll move fast, break stuff guy. So I had this moment in March where the head of our middle school division is grades 5 to 8, was like, Ed, did you give the whole middle school unfettered access to this AI education tool? And I was like, yeah, how else are we going to learn? And she's like, kids are just using it to cheat all the time. It's like, oh God. So we had some missteps for sure.
That's good. Lessons were learned all around. It's a learning experience for all.
But I would say that I'm still figuring out you know what the kid response is? We're holding an AI summit in 10 days where we're bringing some folks. Philly has a lot of like universities, right? University of Pennsylvania, Temple, Drexel, whatever. So we're bringing some faculty to campus from those universities in kind of computer sciences and AI to kind of do a panel discussion. And then right after that, we're going to have a student panel discussion, right? And we're going to bring in a bunch of kids from a wide swath of our high school to kind of talk about what has been their first year with AI, you know, the benefits, the drawbacks, the dangers, what they've seen. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what that reaction is.
When you see the students though, for the most part, do you think, like, would you, and this may be a stupid question, but do you feel like the program is maybe not a success, but being successful as you're navigating it? Like, do you see it slowly kind of like finding its footholds and perches within faculty and students?
By program, do you mean like our efforts around AI?
Yes.
Too early to say. Too early to say. I mean, you know, you got to remember that explosive, you know, GPT-3 release. What month was that? I mean, that was like within the last year.
Yeah. Three was like probably 2 years ago. Now I have to look it up because
whatever the major boom was when all of a sudden everything you saw was like, how incredible is this tool? It was kind of in the midst of the school year, right? So schools operate in these cycles where
right.
You know, we kind of establish, okay, well, what's our focus going to be around teacher professional development? What's our curriculum going to look like? We do that, you know, 12 months in advance. So we've had to kind of build the plane as we've been flying. You know, this AI task force came together in December, you know, of last year. The PD day was a few months after that. PD, you know, professional development. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, you know, whether what we're doing is working. And a lot of what we're doing is going to be instituted this coming academic year. So I'll get back to you. But I hope I'm just glad we're having the conversation. I think a lot of schools would try to like push this stuff off to the side and ignore it or block it. And we're not doing that.
Well, I mean, most companies as well. And, you know, that's kind of why that's why I was telling you earlier that we created the certification program for companies is because like in the last, call it year and a half that I've been speaking at conferences, I've seen like the divide. So what you're experiencing, what you're experiencing at the educational level between students and teachers, I've seen at the professional level between employees and management and C-suite, right? Where employees at the bottom, for the most part, want to use it. Are you telling me I can save an hour every day? Yes, please. I want to do more with my time or less, whatever. That's going to run the gamut. But I can be more efficient, right? But then people at the top, it's a risk, it's a liability, there's cybersecurity, there's proprietary information, and so on and so forth. So there is that bridge between training people and making people at the top comfortable that we have to cross sometime.
Sure. And I would imagine a lot of those risks, it's a risk, it's a liability, there's cybersecurity. I'm sure a lot of that boils down to the same dynamic as work from home over the past 3 years, where it's like, I have this perception of what an efficient worker looks like and the way they're spending their time and whether they're being lazy. And if what I'm seeing counters that worldview, no matter how, you know, metrics-based efficient that employee's being, I'm going to push back on it. Right. So, you know, if a lot of the emails coming out from one of your employee were enhanced by ChatGPT, but the information is still valid and the engine's still moving and the widgets are still getting made, you know, it's just like work from home.
Right.
And I think that's the same dynamic we're going to see at schools. It's like, what does a student of the future look like? How does a student of the future make use of these tools? How can we make sure they're using them so that they're more creative, more efficient, more productive, and not less?
Right. And I think that was a much better way of saying what I was saying earlier, in the sense that it's less about teaching students how to, quote, not cheat. And it's got to come from the top down, where teachers and administrators are saying, what is the definition of cheating now? How are we defining it? Because it's not what we have. This isn't going away. It's going to keep iterating. It's going to keep growing.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, one of the things I'm trying to do with this task force is like kind of a stoplight idea, right? Red light, yellow light, green light, and like for every assignment you give in class, or at the very least in the curriculum overview you give to the kids on the first day, you're like, this course is red light for AI. You're not going to be using it. Or this course is yellow light for AI. I'll tell you when you can and can't use it, right? Like, you can use it to summarize my lecture notes. You can use it to build study guides. You can use it to, train your own AI-based agent that can help you study, right? But you sure as hell can't use it to write content for you.
Right.
And if you do use it to write things for you, you have to cite it, right? Or there's green light. Like, and literally we have this, right? Like my computer science teacher, Scott, who I hired last year, direct from industry, kind of like an app startup guy, he uses, he has his kids use it all the time to literally write code. And that's something that we're really going to be reckoning with, is like, okay, well, what does it look like to be a computer science major in this world where you can kind of make a quick and dirty prototype of a fully functioning mobile app just by holding a wireframe up to a screen and having GPT-4o spit out the Swift UI code. So that stoplight thing is important. And I think at a minimum, what we're going to try to teach students to do here at SCH is, if they want to use AI for something, ask. And if they don't ask, it's academic dishonesty. I think for most classes, that's what it's going to look like this year. Probably not as much for the classes that are under my purview, but it's just going to be the way it is. Like,
that's reasonable.
Case by case basis.
That's reasonable, and that's actually very similar to the parameters put in the EUAI Act. Where you have like the different levels of risk mitigation of just like, no, you can't. This is, civilization ending versus like, yeah, this is fine, even though there's risks. And then there's penalty. I mean, that's basically what you've created, which is kind of neat. Yeah. I also like that you use the analogy of building the plane as you fly, because like that's probably the most common analogy that I hear for entrepreneurship in general. Right? Like, you jump off the cliff, figure out the plane, and hopefully you're flying before you crash. And that was certainly my experience building my business, and you keep iterating and so forth. So I've got obviously your teacher's response. Students are kind of running the gamut, which, I think is very reasonable, right? We're seeing that in the professional world as well. How have parents reacted? What are their feelings towards this?
I don't really know yet. I haven't had the time to dig into that. I think this year is when we're going to find out some of the answers to that. It's a bit of a self-selecting group. Like, if you choose to send your kid to Springhill Chestnut Hill Academy, part of the brand is technology, innovation, this entrepreneurship center, a world-class like robotics team, a focus on engineering. So I think that our families are probably better positioned than most to say, okay, great, you're going to start to like teach my kids about what AI is and how it can be used and how it shouldn't be used. That sounds amazing. But I imagine there are probably some other schools and other colleges with a focus on kind of classic liberal arts education for whom AI would be like anathema. And it's like, okay, well, if you're giving my kids access to GPT as part of their education, why do we even need teachers, and why do we have to spend money to send our kids to this school? They can get everything they need from this AI assistant. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to make our way through that. But I imagine our approach to that will be just like everything we do, fully transparent, right? Like making sure that we are educating the families about how we're approaching this and what we're doing and where we're doing it as early and as often as possible. We have a school magazine that comes out quarterly. There was a huge, 4-page story about this AI task force and what we're doing. And I think the little feedback I heard was nothing but positive.
You know, you bring up the liberal arts thing, and I think, do you ever watch Succession?
Of course.
I think of that episode where the families are at the retreat house when they're talking about buying the other paper.
Yeah,
And
like the old New York Times family.
Yeah, you know, like they're talking. Shiv's talking to that one guy who had the PhD, and she's like, "Oh, thank God you got that. Now you can save yourself the 15 minutes it would have taken to Google something."
Of course.
You know, it comes up regularly with these
Yeah.
conversations. So going into, and I know it's like a little bit. Obviously, we're going into the school year, like you said, like you're kind of a year behind just by virtue of like the logistics of running a curriculum. Have you guys kind of thought through or created what your key indicators would be, or what sort of like goals you're hoping to hit? Any analytics or metrics you're looking to measure to see if like you quote get successful with this, or how have you measured in the past? Like when we talk again, call it June of next year, and we go over like how the program ran for the year. What do you think we'll look back and you can say like, oh, we hit the head? I mean, obviously, I think failures, that's clear. We can figure out if it didn't go well, but like, what are you hoping to achieve by integrating this stuff?
Yeah, so, we kind of have these three aspects of our task force. We have a team that's working on like our philosophy statement as a school, around use of AI. That's kind of a check the box sort of thing where you can get senior admin to sign off. We can publish it in the school, handbook and move on. The two other pillars of our work, number one is tools, like analysis of what's out there, what's appropriate, what should we be using as a faculty. And the third is student literacy, which I touched on earlier. So in terms of key performance indicators and like what I would say would be a successful next 9 months, under the tools heading, it would be what's the adoption of Magic School AI within our faculty and staff, and how is it being used, and how often is it being used, and what are the learning outcomes from that. We were using a different tool. We had the tools committee analyze it. They didn't like it as much. This is kind of a new tool, and we're going to run professional development workshops throughout the year on how to make good use of it. And the student literacy piece is a little harder, but my goal for this year is that we take our curriculum and we look through, in chunks, kindergarten to grade 4, grade 5 to grade 7, grade 8, 9, 10, and grade 11 and 12, and we kind of scope out where is AI being used by students, and how are we moving them along those 4 pillars of technical understanding, critical interaction, ethical consideration, and creative integration. And just at the end of the year, having some outputs from both students and teachers around what this has looked like in the classroom, where it's worked, where it hasn't. That's what it's going to be. So it'll be a little bit of quantitative data, a little bit of qualitative data, and then hopefully, by next summer, we've learned a lot. I think that's all that we can ask for at this point, is that we're learning as we're going and we're collecting information.
Do you feel overall you've got a strong support network within the administration though? Like everyone's kind of like, yeah, we need to do this. Let's do this. This is a bet we want to make.
Yeah, big time. I mean, we just did a whole new strategic plan. One of the aspects of that strategic plan is what do we call it? Something like intentional innovation. So that's the part of the strategic plan that I'm working on with our chief innovation officer. And like the first initiative of that strategic thing is AI, right? So our head of school, the board of trustees, the heads of the different divisions of the school, they all get that this needs to be something we work on. Saul Khan's book was our required summer reading, which, Khan Academy, like his whole book about AI and how it's going to transform the education landscape. We had this task force going. We had this summit in 10 days. We are full steam ahead. What we don't have are all the answers, but we definitely have the support to move forward.
So knowing that you're not alone in this, right? That there are other organizations, both educational and professional, that are trying to get the ball rolling that may not have as much support. Is there any like advice or lessons that you can impart from the last year of trying to get this off the ground? Anything that you can think of that you're like, here's simple ways that you can galvanize your organization to get behind at least initial engagement and curiosity?
Yeah, I think my advice on that is kind of similar to any new technology or new tool, and that's make sure there's strong grassroots opportunity. So make sure that faculty are encouraged and supported in playing with these tools and experimenting with them in the classroom. Make sure that they're given the opportunity to share that work more broadly with the broader teaching community. And I wouldn't push. I think this is too raw a nerve and too much of a potentially perceived existential threat to the profession of teaching to have a school be like, every single classroom must find a method to integrate AI into their teaching by the end of the year, right? I think instead it has to slowly make its way up through the grassroots, and sort of creative teachers who are flexible and adaptable and looking to infuse something new into their teaching practice need to be given the support and the tools to do that with AI, and they need to be able to share those lessons. That's where I would start. That would be my advice.
It's like every other innovation, right? Find the early adopters and lean heavily upon them.
Exactly. And if you've got the top-down support like we have at SCH, that's good too. But I really don't think you can force this. I really don't. I think, as I shared with you on those few bits and pieces from our Devil's Advocacy Club, you're going to have a lot of teachers who look at this as completely antithetical to everything that we try to do with students every day, right? It's a machine that thinks for them. It's not like the internet where you're finding information. Mm-hmm. You're finding it in a way that's way easier than the Dewey Decimal System, but the bottom line is you're still finding information. Now that information is served to you and written for you from this black box technology that even the engineers that built it don't fully understand how it works. So in a lot of ways, it's I understand why people in our profession would be intimidated, scared, or suspicious.
Thank you for being brave for all of us.
Yeah, right.
Dude, this has been such an opportunity to catch up, man. It's really cool what you're doing. I'm going to book you from now for June when your school year's up, because I really do want to hear how it's going, or even when it's going. If we can do it mid-year catch up. Great. Because it's really interesting stuff. I think more people should be engaging with this at the level that you guys are doing at 12, 13 years old. This is the time to expose them.
Great. Yeah, that would be. I'd love to. Keep talking. It's an exciting time to be in this industry for sure. That
it is. I appreciate the time today, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks, buddy.
That's all for today's episode. Remember, you can always reach out to apply to be on the podcast or ask a follow-up question of a previous guest. As always, thank you for your support, and we'll see you next time.